Joseph Stiglitz es economista, es norteamericano y es Premio Nobel. Y hoy que la derecha mundial ha hecho de la palabra libertad su nueva bandera, Stiglitz propone que la izquierda mundial, por su parte, cifre también su idea de lo que es la libertad. La misma palabra libertad, dos proyectos económicos y políticos muy distintos, de hecho que se excluyen uno al otro. Bienvenidos a Largo Aliento. Hola, Joseph Stiglitz, bienvenido a Largo Aliento.
Nice to be here.
Mr. Joseph Stiglitz, la derecha mundial se ha apropiado de la palabra libertad. Es el caso en México. De pronto todos los partidos de derecha usan la palabra libertad en sus lemas, pero raramente definen qué es la palabra libertad. Usted, en cambio, en su último libro, Camino de Libertad, define qué es la libertad para la derecha: la ausencia de regulación estatal de la economía y de la ganancia individual. ¿Qué efectos ha tenido esa libertad de la derecha convertida en gobierno?
Well, the big point I wanted to emphasize was that freedom is a more general notion, that somebody who is at the point of starvation really doesn't have freedom. He does what he has to do in order to survive. And so an important element of freedom that economists would emphasize is what you can do, what your opportunity set is. So the freedom to live up to your potential is an important aspect of freedom that the right agenda doesn't recognize. And it doesn't recognize either the many ways in which not only government, but other individuals impinge on your freedom. So for instance, if during the COVID-19, if other people don't wear masks, don't get vaccinated, and you get the disease, you go to the hospital, you may die, that's taking away your freedom. So it's not only government that affects you, but also everybody who is surrounding you. In the United States, a lot of people are carrying around AK-47s, mass murders almost every day. That takes away freedom. And there are so many ways in which other individuals impinge on your freedom. And so for the government to restrict the ability of others to impinge on your freedom is giving you more freedom. And from a societal point of view, we have to weigh these various constraints and the expansions of freedom that result. So again, to give you another example, and a very poignant one, going back to the pandemic, when the government supported the development of a vaccine against COVID-19, it expanded our freedom enormously. We could leave our home. We could talk to our friends. We could have a more normal life. But to do that, we had to make investment in R&D. To finance that investment, we had to pay taxes. That took away a little bit of freedom. But if you ask from a societal point of view, was that little tax, that constraint, more or less important than the expansion of our freedom that came from the vaccine? It's unambiguous. Almost everybody would say that was a good deal, that the expansion was so much more important than the coercion. So the right really focuses too narrowly on just one important aspect of our freedom.
Háblenos de la libertad de la que habla la derecha. Usted afirma en su libro que tiene un solo problema, que no funciona. ¿Puede abundar en eso?
Well, I mean, the agenda of the right has not succeeded in actually giving most people increased freedom. And I try to expand on that by other examples and some very general principles. But let me give you one more example of where collective action, working together, and a little bit of restraint actually increases freedom. So in New York City or any Mexico City, if you didn't have traffic lights at every intersection, you would have gridlock. But a restraint, a traffic light, is a constraint. You can't go until it says green. That's tying you. You're not able to go. But that enables you, by taking turns, coordinating, to move. In the absence of that, we would all be in gridlock. So a little bit of restraint actually expands freedom. Now, the right has talked about liberalism, about liberalization. In fact, the right agenda sometimes is called neoliberalism, new freedom, but it's a really old freedom. It's a 19th century idea. And they thought getting government out of the market, for instance, deregulating the banks, or getting rid of environmental regulation, increases freedom. But think about what happens in both of those cases. Banking deregulation gave more freedom to the bankers. And what did they do? Exploited other people. We had a financial crisis. It took away jobs, houses. It took away the freedom of many, many more people. So you expanded the freedom of the bankers to behave badly, but you constrained the freedom of everybody else. Think about pollution. Allowing the coal companies, oil companies to pollute our atmosphere expands the freedom of these coal and oil companies. I mean, I agree, that expands, but look at the cost. It takes away our freedom. Somebody with asthma may actually die. The rest of us have to spend more money defending ourselves against climate change. So they are taking away our freedom. And that balancing is one of the main ideas I try to get across. What we've learned after a 45-year experiment with neoliberalism and this liberalization, freedom, is that the economy actually grew more slowly. Most people, standard of living stagnated, went down. A few people at the top did very well, but it did not increase the freedom of most people in our society.
En el año 2011, usted publicó un artículo que nos abrió los ojos a millones. El gobierno del 1% por el 1%, para el 1 1%. Pero usted se equivocó en algo. Para hoy, en los países no es el gobierno del 1% para el 1%, es el gobierno del 0.1% para el 0.0001%. ¿Hasta dónde puede avanzar esta concentración del dinero en una economía global neoliberal?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. Since I wrote that book, the concentration of wealth at the top has grown and grown. And the well-being of the rest of our society has not done well. What is the limit? I think if we have unrestrained oligopolies, unrestrained oligarchs, what we will see is they are rewriting the rules of the economy to allow them to make more and more money. So at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, we passed a number of laws called antitrust or competition laws to restrain the monopolists of the time, Rockefeller and Carnegie and the steel, tobacco, oil monopolies. These are small compared to the problems we face today with the tech giants. But the political power of the tech giants is even more apparent. At the inauguration of President Trump, you saw him surrounded by these oligarchs. And you see now in trade negotiations, say with Europe, that his demanding that Europe give up its Digital Marketing Act that tries to maintain competition in the digital age, the DSA, the Digital Service Act that tries to prevent the digital harms, the dis and misinformation, which is so harmful to our society, the privacy directive that tries to maintain individuals' privacy and that his data not be appropriated by the digital giants. So all of these are examples where the oligarchs are succeeding in getting the Trump administration to put pressure on Europe to give in, let alone what is going on in the United States. So I think we are at a very dangerous moment right now where we don't know whether we're going to be a new plutocracy, inherited plutocracy. To give you just one example of how bad things have gotten at a global level, I chaired a special commission that was set up by President Ramaphosa, who was chairman of the G20, and we just gave our report a few weeks ago. And one of the statistics that we cited there was that over the last 25 years, since the beginning of the century, 41% of the increase in wealth went to the top 1%. And the bottom 50% got 1% of the increase in wealth. And that gives you a picture of the growing divide in our global society.
Es muy impresionante. Frente a esa libertad de la derecha, usted propone la libertad positiva. Hablemos de la libertad positiva, pero por favor, luego de una pequeña pausa. En México, le decía, tenemos un gobierno de izquierda que aumentó el salario mínimo por ley y con eso en los últimos 6 años los salarios crecieron 77% y salieron de la pobreza 13,5 millones de mexicanos. Estamos en general muy contentos los mexicanos. El gobierno goza del 73% de la aprobación. ¿Se puede gobernar bien tolerando un margen de corrupción? ¿Qué nos enseña la historia, profesor?
Neoliberal economics used to say that government should never increase the minimum wage. And the research in economics over the last 30 years has shown that the minimum wage can be an important instrument for increasing the well-being of those.
Profesor Stiglitz, frente a esta concepción negativa de la libertad que tiene la derecha, usted propone la libertad positiva. Háblenos más de qué es la libertad positiva y cómo un gobierno puede hacerla posible.
Well, as I say, the concept of freedom I have is expanding what individuals can do, making it more likely they can live up to their potential. What does it entail? Well, it means in part getting education so that you can use your have a meaningful life, making sure you get nutrition, that making sure that you have adequate access to health care. These are just examples of ways that the government can make sure that every child can live up to his or her potential. Right now, if you're lucky and born to the people at the very top, you can do that. But if you are not lucky, and I jokingly say if you chose the wrong parents, then that's not part of your of what you can do, and so many are suffering from that kind of deprivation during their childhood that they can't live up to their potential.
Usted vive en Nueva York, enseña en la Universidad de Columbia. Votó por Zohran Mamdani, que prometió en su campaña volver affordable, costeable, las cosas esenciales para la vida digna, habitación, comida, transporte, salud. ¿Es a eso con lo que usted se refiere con una libertad positiva?
Yes, very much so. I mean, one way one has to look at it, affordability talks about prices. The other side is looking at your incomes, your wages. And in New York, landlords are able to jack up the prices of the rents. And that is perhaps the most important affordability problem. You live in an apartment and your landlord tells you, unless you pay me 20% more, you have to move. Well, families can't easily pack up and move. Their children are in school, they have jobs. So it gives an enormous bargaining power to the landlord, and they exploit that. And so part of Mamdani's agenda is trying to stabilize rents, to control the increase. Yes, they have to increase in response to increasing costs. Otherwise, you'll get a real shortage. But we have to recognize that there is an imbalance of market power. And when there is that imbalance of market power, you have to have government come in to redress that. Just like, we have an imbalance of market power in the labor market. We used to have strong unions, and unions help workers bargain with employers. But today in the private sector, unions are only about 6% of the labor force. And there's been concerted efforts by the employer groups, by the rich, to defenestrate, to weaken the unions. And, I don't want to pretend that unions are perfect, but they represent the voice of the workers acting collectively, and it tries to balance this bargaining power to get fair outcomes. In fact, recent research in economics suggests that the market power of employers, we call it monopsony power, is so great that wages on average are depressed by some 30% below what they would be in a competitive market. And that shows you the power of employers and what has happened as a result of the weakening of unions.
Hay una lucha de clases actualmente y la está ganando la oligarquía, ¿no es cierto?
Well, I mean, you're right, and the question is, I wrote my paper, as you said, of the 1%, for the 1%, and by the 1%, which today would be 0.01%. I wrote it to make people aware of what was going on. And I wrote my book, The Road to Freedom, to make people, again, aware of the misuse of language. People talk about free enterprise and free markets. They're not free. They're manipulated by the corporations. There's exploitation going on. I wrote those because I wanted people to become aware of what was going on and the story that was being told about these wonderful markets was a fiction. And the story that they were told about, don't worry about inequality, the benefits will trickle down to everybody, that was a fiction. And the fact is, we are still democracies. We have to fight harder and harder to maintain our democracies, but we're still a democracy. And so my hope has been that if we become aware, if more and more citizens become aware of what is going on, they will demand changes. If they realize that the rules of the game are being written by the 1%, for the interest of the 1%, then they will say, no, that's not the way it's supposed to be in a democracy. It's supposed to be the rules are written by the majority for the majority.
Usted sabe que en México gobierna un gobierno de izquierda moderada que permite, que aboga por la democracia y también por el mercado libre. Pero yo leí su libro desde México como un llamado a una izquierda con menos ideología y con mayor entrega de cosas reales, concretas, materiales para la gente, donde la economía, y lo cito a usted, sirva a las personas y no al revés, que las personas sirvan a la economía.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, I believe in markets. I believe in the importance of enterprises, the innovation that can come out of it. But I also believe that too often large enterprises, monopolies, aren't serving the interest. The maximization of shareholder value may not serve the interest of our society. And we know that's true. We know the pollution. We know the ways that firms take advantage of workers. So we know the way that they can exploit consumers if we don't have good regulations. So what I believe is we need a market economy, but we have to accompany that market economy with regulations that makes the market economy even better to serve society. Banks that were under-regulated, we wound up in the great financial crisis, and we all suffered from that. Better regulation would mean less frequent financial collapse. Better regulation of the environment means that we suffer less from pollution. better regulation of competition means that we have a more dynamic economy. So the interesting thing is I view myself as more of a market economist than many on the right, because I'm trying to encourage competition, which is the basis of a market economy. But I also think that there are other important institutions in our society. So for instance, in the United States, the strongest institutions, among the strongest institutions are universities, at least before Trump started attacking them. They were the admiration of everybody in the world, places like Harvard, Columbia, Princeton, Yale, Berkeley, UCLA. Every one of these is either a foundation, a not-for-profit foundation, or a state university. There is no major for-profit university that we think of as one of the great American universities. And that just, I mention that because that illustrates the importance of other institutional arrangements. Government is important for regulating and for innovating. You know, the most important innovation of the 20th century was the internet, and that was a result of government action. We were saved from COVID-19 because of government support for the development of the mRNA platform. So the government has been enormously important in innovation, but so is the private sector, but so is the NGO, the private the not-for-profit universities. So we have a rich, what I call ecology of institutional arrangements. And I think it's a mistake to oversimplify and just say there's private enterprise and there's government. Actually, we want to encourage many different kinds of arrangements. I think churches often play an important role, and especially in the health sector and in the education sector, care for the aged. We know, when the hedge funds start buying up old age homes, and you ask, what do hedge funds know about the care of elderly? The answer is they know how to exploit them. And I don't feel comfortable with hedge funds running programs, old age homes. I would rather have churches do it, or I'd rather have government do it, or not-for-profit do it. But to have a hedge fund, all I can think of, they're interested in money. And I want more than that in the caring of our elderly.
En México, le decía, tenemos un gobierno de izquierda que distribuye ayudas sociales y que aumentó el salario mínimo por ley. Y con eso, en los últimos 6 años, los salarios crecieron 77%. En 6 años, 77% en promedio. Y salieron de la pobreza 13 millones y medio de mexicanos. Estamos en general muy contentos los mexicanos. El gobierno goza del 73% de la aprobación, pero nos preocupan algunas cosas. Nos preocupa que este gobierno de izquierda, igual que los anteriores gobiernos neoliberales, no extirpa de sí a los políticos que roban y hacen negocios con los bienes comunes. Lo que es la corrupción es una antiquísima tradición mexicana. ¿Se puede gobernar bien tolerando un margen de corrupción? ¿Qué nos enseña la historia, profesor?
Well, obviously, government and governance is very, very important. Before coming to that, I wanted to comment on one thing. Old neoliberal economics used to say that government should never increase the minimum wage. And the research in economics over the last 30 years has shown that the minimum wage can be an important instrument for increasing the well-being of those at the bottom, and actually, if it's done well, not have an adverse effect on employment. And it's been quite striking that the change in our understanding of the minimum wage by economists. But neoliberals simply don't understand these advances. And the reason for this is the monopoly or monopsony power that I mentioned before that employers have over workers, and the minimum wage levels that out. And that's why it's been such an effective instrument. Now, I've been a big campaigner for increasing transparency in government, improving rule of law, good processes. One of the reasons I'm very critical of cryptocurrency is that it opens up new opportunities for hiding nefarious activities. It makes money laundering easier. You know, I fought for 35 years or longer for more transparent financial markets, more transparent banking. And then all of a sudden, there's this idea, just because it's digital, it's okay to be secret, to be crypto.
Yeah,
it's absurd. It's absurd. And we've seen already how much the bad actors are. President Trump has pardoned convicted criminals because he likes crypto, because he's making money in the billions off of crypto. Yeah. That is corruption. That is corruption, at least in my definition of corruption. So the concern of people everywhere should be governance is important, because and it's both at the corporate level and at the public level and the government level. And that's, by the way, one of the reasons that press freedom is so important. And it's one of the reasons why academic freedom is so important. Press freedom is important because you are the fourth estate. Good press investigates bad behavior and exposes it. Trump calls the press the enemy of the people. He couldn't be wronger. The fact is that you cannot have good governance, I think, without an active investigative press. And academia plays the same role, because academics spend long time thinking about what are good policies, what are the consequences of tariffs. They expose why it is, for instance, that Trump's tariff policies will lead to lower standards of living. They explain why tariffs are taxes, and by and large are paid by those who buy the imported goods. And that means standards of living of Americans will be going up. Ordinary Americans are going to be going down as a result of those tariffs. So it's important to have academics be free to criticize what governments are doing, and it's important to have the press criticize. Good organizations actually always create control, a group to sort of examine what the organization is doing, to say, are we doing the right thing? And we as a society have created the press and the academia as part of our control mechanism to make sure we're doing the right thing. It was an ingenious, you might say, invention of the Enlightenment. And it's so sad for me to see the attack against these Enlightenment values by the Trump administration.
La gran crítica de la prensa en México a este gobierno de izquierda que sacó 14 millones de seres humanos de la pobreza y subió 77% los salarios, que a mí me parece fantástico, pero la gran crítica es que mientras tanto la economía total no creció. ¿Es natural que si se gasta en ayudas sociales, en servicios públicos, si se aumentan los salarios, no crezca la macroeconomía?
Yeah, there are many reasons why you may not be seeing the economic growth in Mexico, but let me address first the broader issue that you raised, which was a central issue that I discussed in one of my earlier books, called The Price of Inequality, that grew out of the article that you referred to. And the argument that I put forward there, which has now become common wisdom, is well accepted by the IMF, OECD, even right-wing, institutions, is that that good distribution policies, creating a society with more solidarity, less inequality, is actually good for economic growth. That equality policies can be growth-enhancing policies. Now, in the case of Mexico, there are many reasons why you have problems of economic growth. I think you've not invested as much as you should be in education. I think this may sound strange. I don't think you have a high enough tax collection that compared to some of the more successful countries.
No es.
In developing countries, your tax collection is roughly half of what it, or less compared to as a percentage of GDP. Poor countries need to invest in infrastructure, technology, education, health. Those investments pay off and they lead to more growth. You have another problem that is very, very difficult, which is the drug problem. And that obviously is an impediment to economic growth. I can't tell you how to solve that problem, but I can say that it is one of the factors that is contributing to Mexico's slow growth.
Además de que las ganancias del narco no están reflejadas en los números de la macroeconomía, son subterráneas. Entonces, tal vez sí estamos creciendo un poco más de lo que suponemos, pero están creciendo los narcos. Yo le quiero preguntar, no puedo terminar esta entrevista sin preguntarle esto, de los aranceles, the tariffs, la palabra favorita de Trump. Tenemos que ir a una pausa y regresamos de inmediato. En vista de lo irracional de las políticas de Trump hacia México, ¿qué le aconseja a la presidenta mexicana de cómo tratar con este señor que no hace sentido lo que está haciendo, pero nos está haciendo daño económico y de otra índole a México? ¿Cómo tratarlo?
Well, there are many things you need to do over the long run, like diversify away from dependence on the United States. I've said that for a long time, that you are too dependent on the United States. There's always been this joke about the U.S. gets a cold and Mexico gets pneumonia. And so
Trump está imponiéndole a los productos mexicanos y de otros países en la entrada de los Estados Unidos de América aranceles gigantes. ¿Le sirven de algo a Estados Unidos de América?
No, I think they're very bad for the United States. They are a reflection of Trump's grievances, obsessions, misconceptions. You know, one interpretation is he thinks the U.S. is the best country in the world. It's a great country.
Sí, claro.
But because he thinks it's the best country, he thinks everybody should be buying more of our goods than we're buying of their goods. But if he had understood the basic lessons in economics going back to Adam Smith and David Ricardo, it's all based on comparative advantage. And the reason that the imbalance of trade has to do more with macroeconomics. If a country has aggregate domestic investment that exceeds its aggregate domestic savings, then there'll be an importation of capital, and the flip side of that importation of capital is a trade deficit. So it's a reflection of macroeconomics, not unfairness, which is what part of his grievance. Now, in your question of will it be good for the United States, he wants to restore the U.S. industrial power. But we've been through a very difficult deindustrialization, that's clear. And many of the people have lost their jobs, and the communities that have lost their jobs have not recouped. And there is a lot of suffering. But his policies are going to make things worse. Why do I say that? Take manufacturing. And remember, manufacturing is less than 10% of GDP in the United States, less than 10% of employment. So it's a small fraction. It's not the economy of the 21st century, which is an innovation service economy. But just focus for a moment on manufacturing. What he's doing by imposing tariffs on steel and on copper is increasing the cost of manufacturing in the United States. It's increasing the disadvantage of the United States. And you have asked the question, why is China so successful in, say, EVs? I went to a Chinese car factory. It's all produced by robots. Half the workers in the automobile factory were engineers. China has invested enormously in engineers over a long period of time. We have not. And in fact, Trump is attacking our universities, which produce our engineers. So he's making things worse. We bring into the United States engineers from China and from India and from all over the world. He's making it more difficult for us to recruit those engineers from the rest of the world. So he's putting our manufacturing economy at a disadvantage. But from the overall trade point of view, you want to focus on services, because that's where our 21st century economy is. What is he doing to our services? What are our big services? Tourism. Tourists are way down because they don't want to face immigration. They don't want to face what's happened. And you look at our universities, that used to be bringing in an enormous number of students, a major export of the United States. He's attacked our universities and said they shouldn't have as many foreign students. Sí. So his policies are actually undermining the United States.
Cerrando la entrevista, en vista de lo irracional de las políticas de Trump hacia México, ¿qué nos aconseja? Es más, ¿qué le aconseja a la presidenta mexicana de cómo tratar con este señor que no hace sentido lo que está haciendo, pero nos está haciendo daño económico y de otra índole a México? ¿Qué hay? ¿Cómo tratarlo?
Well, there are many things you need to do over the long run, like diversify away from dependence on the United States. I've said that for a long time, that you are too dependent on the United States. There's always been this joke about the U.S. Gets a cold and Mexico gets pneumonia, and
Así es.
so you have to be more diversified, and you have been moving. All of Latin America has been moving to a broader export base than just the United States. Advising on how to deal with your biggest trade partner is really difficult because the agreements with the United States often are not worth the paper they're written on. With President Trump, he rips them up when they're inconvenient. What does an agreement make if you don't comply? He signed an agreement with the EU, not signed an agreement, he made an agreement with the EU in Scotland. And the agreement, 2 weeks later, he started attacking Europe for their digital policies. I mentioned before, the Digital Service Act, Digital Marketing Act, privacy. Says, I want more. I want more. And he keeps saying more. So what I say to some of my friends in Europe, I say, you have to understand any agreement should be viewed as a temporary ceasefire. That be ready for the next round of the battle. But in the meanwhile, you have to do what you have to do to live with your neighbor. You should understand that Americans don't share his attitude either toward immigrants or to Mexico. And that I hope you don't have the hostility to the U.S. just because of what Donald Trump is. That we are neighbors and we want to be good neighbors. And that's where the American people, I believe, are. And I hope in the next election, you will see Americans will express that kind of solidarity that unfortunately has been so destroyed by Donald Trump.
Mi última pregunta. Hace 3 años usted dijo que el experimento Milei no iba a funcionar. ¿Está funcionando? ¿No está funcionando? Denos su diagnóstico.
It is not working. He has managed to keep inflation down by borrowing more and more. Argentina had a hard time paying back it has not been able to pay back the $44 billion it owed to IMF. But to sustain his policies, he had to get another credit line of $20 billion from the IMF and another $20 billion from the US. Now, if Argentina had trouble paying back $44 billion, is it going to be able to pay $80 billion back? Now, what he's done is kept Argentina afloat by getting it deeper and deeper and deeper into debt. I don't call that a good experiment. I feel so sorry for what's going to happen in the future. I think his strategy is to keep inflation low until the next election and hope that people don't understand the deep, deep hole into which that he's dug Argentina into. I hope the Argentinians will realize that he's the impossible situation he's put them in, and that he's stabilized inflation, but at the jeopardy of the future of the country. Now, there is one element of good luck they've had. The production of gas is up as a result of investments made under the previous governments, not because of him, but they are reaching fruition while he's there, and that is of some benefit, particularly if prices stay high. And so there's always the small probability that he'll be saved by this natural resource boom. But I think that's very unlikely, given the magnitude of the debt that he has put on the back of the country.
Profesor Stiglitz, muchas gracias por esta conversación. Muchas gracias por sus libros. Muchas gracias por su brújula en este complicadísimo territorio de la economía mundial. Muchas gracias.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Y a ustedes, amigos y amigas, los espero la próxima semana en otra conversación de largo aliento.